All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm joined here today with James Carpenter, who is Alberta's senior representative to Ottawa, and several members of our Alberta cabinet, including Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Services, Mike Ellis. We have Minister of Transportation and Economic Corridors, Devin Dreeshen, Minister of Technology and Innovation, Nate Glubish, Minister of Environment and Protected Areas, Rebecca Schultz, Minister of Agriculture and Irrigation, R.J. Sigurdsson, and Minister of Indigenous Relations, Rick Wilson. Today we launched our Alberta-Ottawa office that will give us the base of operations we need to advance Alberta's priorities on the ground in our nation's capital. The office will strengthen our relationship with partners on Parliament Hill and in other parts of Canada, and will help us to stay informed on emerging decisions that impact Alberta. Our province has so much to offer: our resources and economic growth, and our innovative ways of working with Indigenous communities towards reconciliation and shared prosperity. I was very pleased that Grand Chief Willie Littlechild shared a prayer with us this morning to open up our office, along with several chiefs from Alberta. This office is going to play a key role in sharing Alberta's story as widely as possible through his work here, through James's work here. Our government is committed to standing up for Alberta within United Canada. The creation of this office in Ottawa is one way we're delivering on that commitment, and I am looking forward to seeing the positive effects that will come from this space right here. I would note that as I was in flight, the chair of the Natural Resources Committee, George Chahal, asked me if I would appear before his committee to explain our renewables policy. And I would just like to accept that invitation. If they happen to finish their business today, I know they have a packed schedule, I'd be delighted to join them. I do have time in my calendar. So my phone is on, and if he would like to invite me to that, I'd be more than happy to come. And this is part of the reason why we're here, is to be able to explain Alberta's position and be able to collaborate with our federal partners. And with that, I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Premier. We'll go with one question, one follow-up today. Please state your name and outlet at the mic, and we'll take as many questions as we can, but we're running tight on time.
Good morning, Premier. Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News. Are you willing to meet with Minister Randy Boissonnault over your newly announced transgender policies? Our understanding is he's sent you an invitation but has not heard back.
We're in the process of working out a couple of meetings with ministers. I understand that the weather has kept a couple of them away from Ottawa, so I believe that my chief of staff is in touch with his office.
And just on these policies, why talk about them now? Who was asking for these in Alberta?
Well, I can tell you any time there has been a change in an approach, is often spurred on because of a particular case. For instance, when the Tavistock Centre was closed in the United Kingdom, it was because of a young individual named Kira Bell, who felt at the age of 16 that they were pressured into making a decision earlier than they might have otherwise. And in our province, we have a transgender woman named Lois Cardinal, who, after 2 years, started her transition at age 19 and received bottom surgery 2 years later. And this is her words. She says, "As I lived with shame and regret for 14 years, I came to realize it wasn't just myself to blame. It was the psychiatrists in Edmonton, the doctors in Montreal. They kept persuading me, despite my serious misgivings. I had to relearn my place as a native and where I belonged in my culture." So she approached the government to seek medical assistance in dying because of the severe complications that she had after her bottom surgery. So these are the kinds of conversations I've been having for many years about how we can provide better post-operative and surgical care for those who are transgender. Right now, we send transgender patients to Quebec for their treatment, and then there is a gap in being able to provide transgender follow-up care. So that's one of the reasons why, as part of this policy, we'll be recruiting someone to be able to do these surgeries in Alberta, and also be able to provide a roster of doctors who can provide the lifelong post-operative surgical as well as hormonal care to transgender adults. But in addition to that, we also have been, when I look at this case and see that somebody at age 19 had very serious reservations about the kind of counseling and care they received, I have to make sure that we're doing our due diligence and all age groups. So we are going to be putting forward policy in the fall to make sure that we create a few guidelines so that we can do a more rigorous process. As I mentioned, we'll be supporting transgender adults in their journey. We'll be supporting families so that they can have the journey with their loved one as well. And in addition, we're going to just make sure that there's a bit more rigor in our school system as we talk about these kinds of really difficult topics. So those are part of the reasons. A lot of it was motivated from individuals I've spoken with in the transgender community about some of the holes that we have and some of the concerns that they've raised. So we're hoping to be able to address that.
Bonjour, Madame Smith. Valérie Gamache de Radio-Canada. I was wondering if you had any discussion with Pierre Poilievre about these transgender policies and if he gave you any kind of support.
No, I've not had a conversation with them.
And MP Boissonnault, Minister Boissonnault said this morning, maybe your policy will inspire other other conservative premier. Did you have any discussion with them? And do you know if any one of them want to maybe put their policies, put their policy forward?
No, I've not had any discussions with other premiers.
Hi, I'm Mylène from La Presse, Mylène Crête. I was wondering, why did you decide not to go with the transgender policy right away? In Quebec, for instance, they decided to have a committee to study the whole thing first.
Well, I think we have announced our intention on a number of policy items, and we're going to be putting the architecture and the legislation in place in the fall. So we've got lots of time for consultation, and we'll be able to get that feedback. But there are things about the process that I do want to investigate, just to make sure that there is that level of rigor that has been recommended. You are supposed to have a long period of time of counseling and living in the opposite gender or the gender of choice. And I just from some of the stories I've heard, I just need to make sure that that process is being followed. So there'll be a bunch of consultation over in the next number of months.
And as for the Alberta office, I was wondering, what do you think Ottawa does not get about the resources, your resources policy?
Well, I have to say that I have a good relationship with some ministers, and I think some ministers really do get it. My principal communication is with Minister François-Philippe Champagne, who has been, I think, a champion of industry all across the country. He's been very helpful in our aspirations for net zero hydrogen with Air Products, net zero cement with Heidelberg, net zero petrochemicals with Dow Chemical. He's also been very helpful in getting to the finish line on the de Havilland deal, which will see water bombers being built in our province. So I would have to say I have a great relationship with those ministers who really celebrate industry in every part of our country. Unfortunately, Stephen Guilbeault is not one of them. Stephen Guilbeault, I had hoped that we'd be able to have a constructive relationship, and he's demonstrated that he's an ideologue. He doesn't listen, he doesn't honor the Constitution, he ignores court judgments, and he continues barreling ahead even though his actions are illegal. So I'm very hopeful. I've said this before, I'd like to see a change in the Environment Ministry so that we can reset our relationship. But I do believe that that's part of the problem, is that there is one extraordinarily ideological member of that cabinet who seems to be running the show. And I don't know why the Prime Minister hasn't reined him in, because he's causing national unity problems. He's creating, I think, problems for them. If you look at the opinion polling and how far they've fallen in the polls, I think a lot of that has to do with the terrible policy that Stephen Guilbeault has announced. And I'm looking for an opportunity to find more ways to collaborate.
Morning, Premier. Stephanie Taylor with the Canadian Press. You mentioned earlier that you had spoken to some trans individuals in informing this policy, but thousands of Albertans took to the streets this weekend opposing these exact policies, many of whom are members of the queer community, many of whom themselves are trans, many of whom themselves have kids who are trans. How will you listen to their feedback, if you will, as you consider implementing or plan to implement this policy? Well,
I've had many conversations with members of the trans community, and it's not a single voice, and it's not a single perspective. I think there's another woman that I consulted with who transitioned as an adult. And when I was talking it through with her about whether she would have liked to have transitioned earlier, she said, well, then I wouldn't have my kids, and I love my kids. So these are the kind of things that that weigh on my mind, is I want to make sure that young people are not closing off options to themselves prematurely. I want to make sure that processes are followed so that it's a well-considered decision and that the child is mature enough to understand the consequences of the decisions that they're making. And so I will keep on consulting with the transgender community, because it's really important that we give those who do make the transition the support they need in their family environment and with their medical needs on a lifetime basis. So we'll continue to have the conversations.
I'll just note, Premier, there might be some members of the trans community that disagree with the anecdotes you're hearing. But what do you make of the Canadian Pediatric Society saying the policies you plan to implement are going to increase the risk of suicide for children in your province?
I mean, there's no question that these young people are very troubled and need that psychological support. I have a young person in my family who's transitioning, and so I know how important it is for family to be included in those conversations and for all the adults in their life to be supportive of them. And so I think that is the message that we're trying to get across, that it does not do a young person any good to have a split from their families or to feel like their families will reject them, because that's not the normal experience. People love their kids and they're going to be supportive. We might not always agree with the decisions that they make, but we should start from a position of love and support. And if there are a tiny number of cases where somebody is at risk, then we have to have Child Protective Services step in to be able to keep that child from harm. So I would say that this is a debate that we have to have. It's a discussion we have to have. There isn't one right way to enact policy. We're mindful of what's happening in the rest of the world, in the UK, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, the Netherlands. These are places that went one particular path, and now they're trying to build a few more guidelines around some of this policy, and we think it's time for us to have that conversation here.
Bonjour, Hélène Buzetti, Les Coop de l'Information. Just to follow up on your transgender policy, I was wondering, what do you think of Randy Boissonneau saying that he's not excluding anything, including maybe challenging to the courts whatever legislation that would come out of Alberta on this?
Well, I think you should wait and see what the legislation looks like. And secondly, we didn't take the position that they did in the UK of shutting down their gender programs when they found problems with the process. We didn't want to do that because that would put a number of the kids who are in process of transition without medical support. So we just need to take a considered approach on this and make sure that young people are being fully informed, they're not being rushed, and that they're able to make decisions at an age where they can deal with the consequences of those decisions. These are sometimes lifelong decisions that they're going to be making. And so that's why we needed to put some guidelines around it. So I think that I think the approach that we're taking is very balanced, and I think it's a bit premature to be trying to talk about legal challenges. I think that we're going to be very considered in the approach we take.
But is it the business of Ottawa to do this? But my real follow-up question was about, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the first time Alberta opens an office in Ottawa?
No,
it wasn't.
No, Chief Roy Whitney was with us this morning, and he's the chief of Tsuut'ina Nation, and he said that he was here for the last opening of the Alberta office, which he believes happened under Ralph Klein.
Oh, so I was wondering because Quebec has had one for so many years, and I was wondering to what extent you got inspired by the Quebec experience, but
I would say probably 100% inspired by the Quebec experience. When you look at the civil service, which is largely bilingual and so draws largely from the Quebec population, and the fact that Hull is just across the way, the fact that they felt a need to have an embassy in Ottawa, I was very mindful of that. And I can tell you James Carpenter has already reached out to the Quebec embassy to talk about how we might be able to collaborate on issues. And I would actually welcome more premiers to follow our lead. I can tell you could probably talk to any premier. I don't think any one of them has a very positive or constructive relationship with the federal government right now for the same reasons that we do. It doesn't matter what the political stripe is. So if we can help to further the conversation with our provincial partners in Quebec, we'd be more than happy to continue that.
Hello, Premier. Davis Legree, iPolitics. Just one question from me. Your province's moratorium on approving new clean energy projects is set to expire later this month. I'm wondering if you're considering extending it past February.
No, we will not extend it. It will be lifted on February the 29th. And we will, I mean, people should know part of the clarity that we're going to be giving to our renewable sector, because we are the destination for solar and wind investment in the country. I think we had 75% of the projects invested in Alberta, and we want to continue to be the leader in adding a responsible amount of wind and solar onto our grid. But people need to remember what happened in the middle of the month when it was minus 35, in some cases minus 61 with the wind chill. At 5 o'clock at night, there was 0 solar and there was 7 megawatts of wind blowing, even though we have 6,000 installed megawatts of power. We were watching as the amount of electricity usage kept inching up to 12,393 megawatts, virtually all of that coming from natural gas, some hydro, and some from the interties with Saskatchewan. But if we hadn't been able, if it had gone 40 megawatts more, we would have had to have rolling blackouts in the dead of winter, dead of night, with minus 35 plus weather, as kids were doing their homework, as parents were making dinner, not knowing when it was going to come back on again. What rolling blackouts mean in our province is 120,000 homes at a time are plunged into darkness for 30 minutes at a time. And that was just untenable. So we had to do out an emergency alert. But this is the point, is that every time we bring wind and solar on, we have to bring an equivalent amount of backup on. And as we continue to grow, and we're expecting our electricity need to double by 2050, it does us no good to have unreliable intermittent sources of power when we have such extremes in temperature in our province. I was very heavily struck by this when I watched what happened in Texas. When Texas had their power grid fail, and they have a very similar structure of their market as we do, 346 people died. Like, this is life or death in a province like ours, which is why, ideological arguments aside, we have to make sure that reliability and affordability are number one. We can reduce emissions too, but we have to make sure that we're doing it in a balanced way.
And we have time for 2 more questions, and I see 2 of you at the mic, so go ahead.
Ian Bailey from the Globe and Mail. Premier, what are you hoping to accomplish in your meetings with ministers here in Ottawa today? What do you hope to get out of it by the time you depart?
Well, we have a couple of tables that we've put together with our deputy ministers, and my deputy minister of energy is here as well. He's been leading our discussions with the federal government. We're working with them on establishing a framework for small modular nuclear reactors. We're working with them on building out our hydrogen infrastructure, because the hydrogen economy is going to be very important for zero emissions vehicles, as well as net zero homes in our province. We've had some great strides that we're making on things like geothermal and ammonia. We want to be able to work with the federal government to create a structure so that we can support ammonia exports to Japan through the Port of Prince Rupert. And then on top of that, trying to find a way to get to a pathway of carbon neutrality by 2050. That's been our proposal, is we think that given enough time frame, with the incredible technology and ingenuity of our industry in Alberta, we think we can get to a 2050 target. The dispute I have with the federal government is they want to speed up a timeline that is unrealistic and unachievable. And when you have an unachievable and unrealistic time frame, it's not an emissions reduction policy. It's a shut-in policy. It's a policy demand that would require us to shut in our production. And we're just simply not going to do that. It's unconstitutional for them to ask it of us. But I think that there's some great room for common ground. And that's what I'm here with, the spirit of collaboration. So I hope we can find some of that.
And as a follow-up, how much support is there amongst your federal colleagues, your UCP caucus and cabinet, for wading into all of these issues on gender, parental consent, gender-affirming treatments, all at once, and sex education all at one time?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, I think we wanted to make sure that we were watching what was happening in international jurisdictions and what was happening in the rest of the country. And having a discussion about pronouns is really just the beginning of the process. When a child changes their identity, it moves on to puberty blockers, then moves on to cross-sex hormones, then moves on to top and bottom surgery. That's the pathway. And so we had to have a conversation about what is the appropriate ages to be able to make those life-altering decisions. So that's part of the reason why we put it together as a package, so that there's some policy around health, some policy around education, and some policy around sport. I've been watching as well some of the incidents that have happened in sport. I just saw a video making the round about a rugby game where one woman was just picked up and pile drive by a much stronger transgender female athlete. And then the MMA fighter who was in the finals and just refused to participate in the final because she was up against a transgender athlete. And her view is that biological athletes who are born biological male will have a punch that's 165% stronger. So we have to make sure that we're protecting the safety of women and girls in sport as well. So I would say that we wanted to be considered, we wanted to be thorough, we wanted to address all elements of this, as opposed to just taking it piecemeal. Because when a child starts down this pathway, it moves very, very quickly. And so that's why we want to make sure that we have the best support for those as they were going through it. And we're also supporting transgender individuals into adulthood.
Hi, Zian Lam with Politico. You're headed to Washington at the end of this week, I think from Wednesday to Friday.
Correct.
So who are you meeting with in Washington? It's obviously a busy election year down there. So who is taking your calls from Congress?
I have a number of meetings that I think we booked. I mean, I can follow up with you on who we booked. Some of it is a little bit of a work in progress. We have James Rajat, who is our Washington representative. We've had an office in Washington for some time, and a number of different speaking engagements as well. But I'd be happy to follow up with you and give you my itinerary. Great, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.